Hello, and welcome to this episode of Our Family Tree. Today, we are going to trace our family roots through the Waterhouse lineage that leads us all the way back to our ancestor, Richard Warren, who happened to be a passenger on the Mayflower that sailed to America in 1620. We will see how each generation migrated throughout New England and became prominent members of their community. And through documentation, we will see how we are related to each generation as we travel up our family tree. I will also reveal a famous singer-songwriter at the end of this video who is also related to us, so stay tuned for that. We begin with our grandmother, Ruth Wentworth Waterhouse, who was the mother of our mother, June Moffett. Ruth Wentworth Waterhouse was the 8th great-granddaughter of Richard Warren, who was a passenger on the Mayflower that sailed to America in 1620. According to her marriage record, Ruth Waterhouse married Ernest Albert Bean on November 29, 1922, in Cape Elizabeth, Maine. They had 4 daughters, Gertrude, Hazel, June, and Elaine. Ruth was born on April 13, 1897, in Cape Elizabeth, Maine. Ruth lived almost her entire life in Cape Elizabeth and became well known throughout the community. She eventually became a local tax collector and even had a street named after her maiden name, Waterhouse. While living in Cape Elizabeth and raising her 4 daughters, Ruth and her husband Ernest lived a happy life residing in a very quiet neighborhood in a house on Spurwink Avenue. Ruth died on February 8, 1997. According to Ruth's birth record, Ruth Waterhouse was the daughter of Harry Cole Waterhouse and his wife Gertrude Wentworth, which brings us up to the next generation on our family tree. Harry Cole Waterhouse was our great-grandfather, and he was the 7th great-grandson of Richard Warren of the Mayflower. According to his marriage record, Harry married Gertrude A. Wentworth on December 21, 1893, in Portland, Maine. They had 2 children, Ruth and Ruel. Harry Waterhouse was born on January 18, 1857, in Cape Elizabeth, Maine, according to his birth record. Harry died in the year 1926. Harry Waterhouse was the son of Charles H. Waterhouse and his wife Carolyn M. Thomas, according to page 103 of the Tilson genealogy, which brings us to the next generation on our family tree. Carolyn M. Thomas was our great-great-grandmother, and she was the 6th great-granddaughter of Richard Warren of the Mayflower. Caroline Thomas was born in Camden, Maine, but relocated to Cape Elizabeth, Maine, where she met her future husband, Charles Waterhouse. Charles H. Waterhouse is our great-great-grandfather. Charles was 24 years old when he married Carolyn M. Thomas. She was 26 years old. Their son, Harry Cole Waterhouse, was born 2 years later. Charles H. Waterhouse was the son of Sea Captain John Waterhouse and Ruth A. Sawyer. He also had a brother, John Waterhouse, who lived from 1825 to 1896. When Charles's father dies in 1850, he is 20 years old, and according to the 1850 census, he is living with the Sawyers learning house construction. When the Civil War broke out in 1861, almost all men in the U.S. of ages 16 to 60 were expected to serve. Charles Waterhouse was 31 years old and a farmer in Cape Elizabeth, Maine. But he was also a husband and a father. His wife, Carolyn, is at age 31 at this time, and their one child, Harry Cole, was only 4 years old. According to Charles Waterhouse's military record, he served as a corporal in the Civil War. He enlisted in 1861 and was a volunteer in Company I in the 6th Regiment Infantry. Charles enlisted in the 6th Regiment in August 21, 1861, only a month after his unit was formed. It would operate June 1, 1861 through July 1863. A month later, Charles had already proven himself worthy of promotion and being promoted from sergeant to colonel September 1, 1861. This regiment was composed principally of the hardy lumbermen from the eastern portion of the state of Maine. The recruitment poster at that time claimed, "The 6th Maine is looking for members. Will you join us in defeating the rebels?" The 6th Maine is a unit that likes to be a combination of fun and realism and personal skill. The men were a volunteer regiment, but they were counted on in battle and saw action in almost every major battle of the Civil War in the East. When the unit was formed, they received new uniforms of gray coats with 8 main buttons down the front, plain gray trousers, and a plain gray cap. They first were sent to Baltimore during 1861 and later to Washington, D.C. Sickness and death was so prevalent in Company F that it was disbanded and integrated into another Company G under the command of General Smith. In March 1862, his company joined in the advance on Manassas. They were then asked to join the advance on Richmond and then to Yorktown, April 1862. At Yorktown, the unit held a key position until the enemy evacuated. For the remainder of its 3 years, the regiment saw the most arduous and active service. It participated in 10 general engagements and in a great many skirmishes. On May 24, 1862, it was the Battle of Mechanicsville, and during June, it was almost daily engagement with the enemy. In autumn, it joined in the Maryland Campaign. By October 1862, the unit's numbers were so reduced that it was sent back to Portland, Maine to recruit more men. On January 21, 1863, it left Portland with a battalion of 5 companies filled by consolidation and rejoined its old command, the 6th Corps at White Oak Church, Virginia. From February 2nd to May 11, 1863, it was with the Light Division, and during this period took an honorable part in the Battle of Chancellorsville, where it lost 128 officers and men killed and wounded. By May 2, 1863, it was in the storming party at Maury's Heights near Fredericksburg. On May 23rd, Company F participated in the Pennsylvania campaign leading up to Gettysburg. At this time, he is transferred from Company F to Company G and perhaps to the 7th Regiment.
Attention battalion!
July 2nd through the 4th, 1863, is the Battle of Gettysburg. Charles's regiment brought 436 men to the field. The regiment arrived on the Gettysburg battlefield late in the afternoon of July 2nd. It had made an epic 30-mile march straight through from Manchester, Maryland. They arrived just as the Confederate Army failed to break the Union line, providing badly needed support to the Union left flank. The 6th Maine moved at dusk to the east slope of the northern side of Little Round Top along the Taneytown Road and was held in reserve until morning. According to Charles Waterhouse's military record, sometime on July 2nd, Charles was shot in the leg. While the unit continued to support the east slope of Big Round Top on the extreme left of the Union line, Charles was likely not participating, or if so, was doing so injured. Charles was discharged in July 1863. He went home to Cape Elizabeth, Maine. He had served 3 years and 16 days. His unit of volunteers would also see action at the Spotsylvania Courthouse, May 8th through the 17th, 1864, Cold Harbor, June 1st through the 12th, first assault on Petersburg, destruction of the railroad at Weldon, and on to defend the attack on Washington, D.C. A year after his discharge, his unit was disbanded and the men mustered out. The 6th and 7th Regiments are honored with the monument at Gettysburg. The Battle of Gettysburg was the largest and deadliest battle of the American Civil War. For 3 days, over 160,000 men on both sides fought. More than a quarter were killed, wounded, or went into captivity. The survivors knew they had been through one of history's great struggles. The state of Maine contributed 65,000 men to the Union Army during the Civil War. Over 3,700 men from Maine fought at Gettysburg. Each Maine unit on the Gettysburg battlefield is honored by one or more monuments. The monument to the 6th Maine Volunteer Infantry Regiment is south of Gettysburg on Howey Avenue. The state of Maine dedicated the monument in 1889. The monument to the 7th Maine Volunteer Infantry Regiment is southeast of Gettysburg on Neal Avenue. According to his pension record, he applied for and was granted a pension for his service some 24 years later. It should be noted that if his son, Harry Cole Waterhouse, had died young, the family line would have been lost. But it is through Carolyn M. Thomas that the line of the Waterhouse is connected to the original Mayflower descendant. Charles Waterhouse died on January 22, 1903. According to Carolyn's death record, she died on December 31, 1902 in Cape Elizabeth, Maine. Also, according to page 103 of the Tilson genealogy, Carolyn Thomas was the daughter of Edward T. Thomas and his wife, Melinda Fales Tilson, which brings us up to the next generation on our family tree. We will now leave the Waterhouse family and follow our family tree through the Tilson family. Melinda Fales Tilson was our great-great-great-grandmother, and she was the 5th great-granddaughter of Richard Warren of the Mayflower. According to page 103 of the Tilson genealogy, Melinda married Edward T. Thomas on September 3, 1820. They had 5 children: Edward, Mary, Sarah, Ruel, and Carolyn. According to page 102 of the Tilson genealogy, Melinda was born on October 19, 1799, in Thomaston, Maine. Her father, Perez, was 34, and her mother, Melinda, was 32. The Tilson family was quite prominent in Thomaston, if not rich. They were strong members of the church, with Perez Tilson, her grandfather, being a deacon. and her father's family had helped build the town of Thomaston. Her father's house, where she grew up, is known as the David Fales House and is the oldest house in the area. The town of East Thomaston separated from Thomaston in 1848 and changed its name to Rockland in 1850. Rockland became a city in 1854. It becomes the next town over from Thomaston. There is also the Tilson Farm Barn still standing in Rockland. The barn is estimated to have been built around 1886 when it first appears on the tax roll. The land on which the barn was built was purchased by Davis Tilson in the late 1870s. He is Melinda's nephew and was a brigadier general who led the Maine volunteer militia in the American Civil War. Melinda died on April 30th, 1875. And according to page 102 of the Tilson genealogy, Melinda Fales Tilson was the daughter of Perez Tilson and his wife Melinda Fales, which brings us up to the next generation on our family tree. Perez Tilson was our fourth great-grandfather, and he was the fourth great-grandson of Richard Warren. According to page 102 of the Tilson genealogy, Perez Tilson married Melinda Fales on February 23, 1797. They had 6 children: Perez Jr., Myra, Hannah, Edward, Charles, and Melinda. Perez Tilson was born on March 14, 1765, in Halifax, Massachusetts. In May 1795, Perez Tilson of Halifax, Massachusetts, at age 30 years old, went to Thomaston, Maine, and settled on a farm. 2 years after he arrives in Thomaston, Maine, he marries Melinda Fales. This is his first wife. Melinda was from Thomaston, Maine. In the 1810 census of Thomaston, Maine, it is just he and Melinda. Melinda's father, David Fales Jr., built the oldest house in Thomaston, Maine, around 1786. It is the home Melinda Fales would have grown up in. In the 1820 census for Thomaston, Maine, Perez and Melinda are living near her family, the Fales. Together, they have 6 children in 12 years. He was also one of the founders of the Congregational Church in 1809 and became deacon in 1818. Perez died on October 5, 1852, in Knoxville County, Maine. According to pages 64 and 65 of the Tilson genealogy, Perez Tilson was the son of John Tilson and his wife Mercy Sturtevant, which brings us up to the next generation on our family tree. Mercy Sturtevant was our 5th great-grandmother, and she was the 3rd great-granddaughter of Richard Warren of the Mayflower. John Tilson was our 5th great-grandfather and lived in Plymouth, Massachusetts Bay. He eventually relocated to Halifax, Massachusetts, where he met his future wife, Mercy. According to page 64 of the Tilson genealogy, Mercy married John Tilson on November 11, 1751, in Halifax, Plymouth. They had 9 children: John Tilson Jr., William, Lydia, Mercy, Perez, who died as an infant, and then they had another son named Perez, Josiah, Robert, who also died as an infant, and then had another son named Robert. Mercy Sturtevant was born on January 12, 1731, in Halifax, Massachusetts. We don't know much about John Tilson, but we do have some information about his son, John Tilson Jr. According to page 65 from the Tilson genealogy, John Tilson Jr. was a very kind-hearted, peaceable, industrious man, a great worker indeed, a man of excellent common sense. According to page 65 from the Tilson genealogy, John Tilson Jr. served as a volunteer in the American Revolutionary War. He enlisted as a private in Lieutenant Judah Wood's company in Colonel Thomas Lathrop's regiment. He served 15 days in the company and marched from Halifax to Bristol, Rhode Island on December 9, 1776. This shows how important it was to defend their families and their property. Naturally of a cultivated mind, he became more educated than many of his neighbors. With such surroundings and his old-fashioned notions, few would have done more for their children. He was one of the wealthiest men in Halifax in 1815. He built a large house in the west part of the town. His son, Captain William, occupied it until his death. Their grandson, William Tilson, occupied it in 1896. According to page 64 of the Tilson genealogy, Mercy died on February 15, 1830. Mercy Sturtevant was a daughter of Josiah Sturtevant and his wife Hannah Church. This brings us to the next generation on our family tree. We now leave the Tilson family and follow our family tree through the Church family, which will lead us to Richard Warren of the Mayflower. Hannah Church was our sixth great-grandmother, and she was the second great-granddaughter of Richard Warren of the Mayflower. Hannah lived in Scituate, Plymouth, Massachusetts, but eventually moved to Halifax, Massachusetts, where she settled down and spent the rest of her life. Josiah Sturtevant, who was our sixth great-grandfather, also relocated to Halifax from Plymouth, Massachusetts. Josiah and Hannah were married on Christmas Eve, December 24, 1719, in Scituate, Massachusetts. He was 29 years old and she was 20. They had 12 children: Nancy, Josiah, Charles, Zadok, William, Hannah, Church, Mercy, John, Lucy, Dependence, and Samuel. Josiah is a respected member of the community, eventually serving as constable, justice of the peace, and coroner. His older sons were too old for the Revolutionary War, but younger sons, Dependence and Samuel, were in their 30s and served, returning home afterwards. It is Captain Josiah Sturtevant that established what was called the Sturtevant Cemetery in Halifax, which is now called the Monpensett Lake Cemetery. Many Sturtevants, including Josiah and Hannah, as well as other members of the community, are buried there. It is Hannah that brings to the marriage the Mayflower line. Hannah Church was born on October 22, 1699, in Scituate, Plymouth, Massachusetts. Hannah died on March 14, 1788, in Halifax, Massachusetts. Hannah Church was the daughter of Richard Church and his wife Hannah Stover Bryant, which brings us up to the next generation on our family tree. Richard Church was our seventh great-grandfather, and he was the great-grandson of Richard Warren. Hannah Stover Bryant was our seventh great-grandmother and lived in Cape Nettic, Maine. She relocated to Scituate, Massachusetts, where she married Richard Church. Richard married Hannah Stover Bryant on February 2nd, 1696, in Scituate, Plymouth. They had 3 children, Richard Jr., Hannah, and Ruth. Richard Church was born on March 24th, 1668, in Scituate, Plymouth Colony. Richard died on June 17th, 1703, in Scituate, Plymouth. She was left a widow at age 33 years. After the death of Richard Church in 1704, Hannah was said to have married a David Bryant in Scituate on July 31st, 1706. We can confirm that she not only remarried, but had other children, either as a product of the marriage or as stepchildren. Hannah outlived both husbands. She died April 6, 1736, at the age of 67 in Scituate, Plymouth, Massachusetts Bay Colony, British colonial America. Richard Church was the son of Nathaniel Church and his wife Sarah Barstow, which brings us up to the next generation on our family tree. Nathaniel Church was our 8th great-grandfather, and he was the grandson of Richard Warren of the Mayflower. Nathaniel lived in Duxbury, Massachusetts Bay, but he eventually moved to Scituate, Massachusetts Bay. Nathaniel Church married Sarah Barstow in 1665. They had 9 children: Abigail, Richard, Nathaniel, Alice, Joseph, Charles, Sarah, Ruth, and Thomas. While one son, Benjamin Church, was the famous Indian fighter, his brother, Nathaniel, was apparently more a lover than a fighter. We see in the Pilgrim Congregation Notes the following entry: Elizabeth Soule and Nathaniel Church were fined £5 on March 3, 1663, for fornication. On October 5, 1663, Elizabeth sued Nathaniel for £200 for failing to marry her, but the court awarded her only £10. In the case of Nathaniel Church, something must have happened for the marriage not to take place, and Elizabeth would have had to sue him in order to save face and marry someone else. Nathaniel left Plymouth and moved some 30 miles north to Scituate. Scituate was a small village on the shore of the south of Boston's Bay. Nathaniel Church settled in Scituate in 1666. His farm was on the North River, south of Cornet Stetson's, and included the Bald Hills. His house stood by the river nearly opposite Job's Landing. Nathaniel Church was born in 1642 in Duxbury, Plymouth, Massachusetts Bay. Nathaniel died in October of 1689 in Scituate, Plymouth, Massachusetts Bay, and is buried at Burial Hill, Plymouth, Massachusetts. Nathaniel Church was the son of Elizabeth Warren and her husband Richard Church, which brings us up to the next generation on our family tree. We now leave the Church family and follow the Warren family that will lead us to Richard Warren of the Mayflower. Elizabeth Warren was our 9th great-grandmother and was the daughter of Richard Warren of the Mayflower and Elizabeth Walker. According to the Massachusetts Town Clerk Vital and Town Records, Elizabeth married Richard Church on March 14, 1634, in Plymouth, Massachusetts. They had 9 children: Nathaniel, Joseph, Benjamin, Charles, Caleb, Abigail, Sarah, Mary, and Deborah. Elizabeth had been born most likely in Holland, and she accompanied her mother to Plymouth aboard the Anne. But who was Richard Church, and where did he come from? Richard Church was born about 1608. He is the first person with the Church surname in this country. He probably arrived at Boston, moved to Plymouth January 2, 1632. In 1647, he exchanged his lands at Eel River, Plymouth, given him by Mrs. Warren, and moved to Hingman. He made a deposition at Sandwich, August 25, 1664, in which he gave his age as about 56 years old. He died at Dedham, December 27, 1668, and was buried at Hingman. His will, dated 2 years earlier, provided for wife Elizabeth and all of his children. Elizabeth died on March 9, 1669, in Hingman, Plymouth Colony. Elizabeth Warren was the child of Richard Warren and Elizabeth Walker. This leads us up to the very beginning of this family tree, Richard Warren. Richard Warren was our 10th great-grandfather and was one of the passengers on the Mayflower that sailed to America in the year 1620. Richard Warren married Elizabeth Walker on April 14, 1610, in Great Amwell, Hartford, England. They had 7 children: Abigail, Mary, Sarah, Anne, Elizabeth, Nathaniel, and Joseph. Richard Warren was born in the year 1578 in England. Long before the Mayflower set sail for the New World in 1620, tensions had been building up in England and Europe to bring the Pilgrims to the point of seeking out a new home. On December 21, 1620, the first landing party left the ship to look for an appropriate building site. Richard Warren was among the expedition party to explore where they had landed. This type of shore exploration was a dangerous undertaking. They had no idea what to expect. The colonists drafted and signed the first governing document of the colony, the Mayflower Compact. The intent of the compact was to establish a means of governing the colony, though it did little more than assume a colony should be governed like any English town. This independent and fair governance was the foundation of the Pilgrims' view that each congregation should be independently governed by its own members. The Mayflower Compact was signed by 41 Puritan men, including Richard Warren. During the winter, the Mayflower colonists suffered greatly from lack of shelter, diseases, and hunger on board the ship. Many of the men were too ill to work. 45 of the 102 pilgrims died. Only 7 residences and 4 common houses were constructed during the first winter out of a planned 19. By the end of January, enough of the settlement had been built to begin unloading provisions from the Mayflower. Richard Warren was one of 50 who survived the first winter. It would be another 2 years before his wife would arrive on the ship Annie, and they would build a family and a life in this new world. Richard Warren died in the year 1628 in the Plymouth colony. His wife Elizabeth died on October 12, 1673 in Plymouth. Elizabeth Warren outlived her husband and maintained their properties that would continue to grow in size and value over the next 3 generations. The family would grow and would expand beyond the Plymouth colony to outlying areas where there was more land and less rules. In fact, they would eventually be one of the founding families of Halifax, Massachusetts, participating in the governance, growth, in defense of the town. This was the world of our descendants, expanding further out away from safe garrisons to acquire land to better themselves. Never could they have imagined that future generations of Englishmen would turn on each other in the Civil War. Many may have not believed they would turn on Britain itself. So now it's time to unveil what everyone has been waiting for. Who is the mysterious, famous singer-songwriter we are related to? Are you ready? If you guessed Taylor Swift, then you are right. And just how do we know Taylor Swift is related to us? Our mother, June Moffett, and Taylor Swift both happen to be ninth great-granddaughters to, yep, you guessed it, Richard Warren of the Mayflower. So this makes June Moffett and Taylor Swift 10th cousins. June's children are 10th cousins once removed, and their children are 10th cousins twice removed. Taylor Swift's family tree ties into Nathaniel Warren, who is the sibling of Elizabeth Warren. Elizabeth Warren is the ancestor our tree ties into. Both Elizabeth and Nathaniel are the children of Richard Warren of the Mayflower. So that was our family tree in a nutshell. We came from a long line of very strong-willed people who sought out to have a better life in the new world called America. We are here today because of their courage and sacrifices that they made during their lifetime. Thanks for watching, and see you next time on the next episode of Our Family Tree.